Bonjour à tous les amis et collègues. Je vais parler en anglais. Can you hear me well? Yes? No? Okay. Okay. So the topic is visual music and immersivity. And I'm going to share a little bit about my research about this subject. Let me start saying that the ability of humans to localize sound is often named as having evolved as an important mechanism for survival. When people or animals communicate across a physical distance, at least two types of information are transmitted: the semantic value of the sounds and the location of the sound sources. Early humans probably imitated animals for the purpose of establishing territory or for alerting others of danger. Birds communicate for the same purpose. I mean, we can find a lot of very interesting examples in one of the books from Barry Truax in acoustic communication. So I started to look to search for things about spatialization, immersivity, both in the sound world and also in the visual world. So this is a typical example from 1951 from Pierre Schaeffer using the pupitre d'espace. And there were like 4 rings, and this was manipulating sound in space. The same very typical image from Stockhausen trying to distribute the sound, because all around you can see the different microphones, and those microphones were assigned to different tracks on Contacte, for example. And that's the way that you can see how the sounds were going from one place to the other, because they were going from one track to the other. So there are several interesting things, ways of manipulating sounds in space, like the Philips Pavilion in '58. And we can see that at that time, Edgar Varese, he was using about 350 loudspeakers or more, and the sounds were like traveling around the space, of course, with a very complex, but at the same time, compared to what we can do now, simple system. At that time was really extremely complex to make the sound to travel inside the space through all these speakers. So we see that there are like different ways of using sound in the space, how the space is being used musically, but also, I mean, the way sound is moving around the space. I'm not talking only technically speaking, but I mean, in terms of the reception, what we are expecting, how the sound is moving, and if the sounds are related to images or not. Like, for example, in this case, in the Philips Pavilion, we have slides, lights, films, etc., all together. Telemusique, another example, in this case with 5 tracks, and again, where the multiple tracks are a key element to make the piece work out of the many other aspects of this piece. But I mean, the multi-track aspect in this piece of Stockhausen was also very important. Same as what we can see, what was happening in the World Fair in Japan in the 60s, where also Stockhausen, we can see him in the photo that is in the right, where this dome was used to spatialize the sound. And we can see here some of the graphics related to how the sound was distributed in the space. There are many examples, like in this case, for example, this system was by Pierre Henry for the premiering a piece from Olivier Messiaen in '91. And we can keep going and going, because basically what we can see in this graphic is we are trying to work with the 3 different axes, but in different ways. And sometimes we move, like the listener move, and sometimes we try, like it happens a lot, depending where you go where you study electroacoustic music, for example, in some cases, you try to put the students, everyone must be in the hot spot, in the middle of something, but there are many other ways, many other possible ways. And there are many pieces, including pieces by Sandeep, for example, where the musicians are moving, and maybe the public, the audience is moving too. So we have different ways of approaching the sound and music and the perception of the music. So in this case, this is a very early piece of mine that Simon Pierre was talking about chant and human voices. In this case, were four resynthesized voices that were doing like no other voices were able to do. And we cannot hear it in the original way, but in the original way, these four voices that you're going to listen here were just briefly, but they were like playing on each corner of a quadraphonic space. So let's see if you can listen to this. I hope yes. I hope you can hear that. Is right? Okay, good. So it's just a short example, but I mean, so in this case, these are four voices that are one on each corner. So it's very simple. It's a quadraphonic space. So there is no movement. The movement is created because the voices are creating different kind of counterpoints along the piece. And the basic thing is basically analysis and resynthesis, close to what Simon Pierre was mentioning before. Or you have these other ways. I mean, you have a quadraphonic space, once again, but in this case of the Chowning piece, Turinas, you have a movement and you have like local reverberation, global reverberation, you have the Doppler shift, but you can move sounds around the space. Imagine that you have, this is the quadraphonic space, and you can bring it closer or farther away from the listener, and you can create all this kind of movement in a very complex way. And very briefly, let me play just very, very briefly. If you listen to this portion of Karma, this is another piece I was creating at Stanford University in '86. The previous one with the voices was done in Padova University when there was almost no way to have access to these kind of things in certain countries, like in the country where I was born. So, for example, in this case, if you listen, this simple part that you were listening now, I mean, there were like hundreds of little tiny sounds, more or less high frequency, mid-high frequencies. And based on the same system that Chowning was developing, they were distributed with concentric orbits. So this was going around. Of course, we are listening this in a very simple way now, but if you listen to the original piece, in the original piece, you have like different orbits going around in different directions, different speeds, and even irregular orbits are not perfect circular orbits. So you can listen to an unbelievable amount of sounds just surrounding you and moving in one direction and other is almost crushing your perception. So this is like a different way of approaching. I mean, maybe you are in a specific space, the sounds are moving around you, but it's a very complex set of concentric irregular orbits. Revelations by Durand-Begot is a piece specifically created for headphones. So this is very interesting. Begot was writing a book, 3D Sound for Virtual Reality and Multimedia, that you can see in the upper right part, and is with a label from NASA. And he was experimenting many years ago, we're talking about mid-80s, specifically with music for headphones. And then you have another approach and another reality. Maybe today is more common. Okay, we create specifically for headphones, but for a specific application. Different, like in this case, is when you think about experimental music or electroacoustic music, when the music is composed specifically to be listened through headphones. And he was working with composer Gordon Muma, and he was composing also like a subtitle of the piece Audio Erotica that was subtitled Begon Mido, because they were working together on this. And as you can see here, it says it used only a single short sound, 50 millisecond pulse of relatively broadband noise with a mildly tapered attack and decay. And basically, this is how it is manipulated. The musical syntax is achieved entirely with the spatial placement of that single sound. There are no pitch, timbre, or loudness attributes except as they result from spatial location of the single sound. Or you have this other position, Gordon Monahan, when he's performing speaker swinging, an experiment for 3 or more swinging loudspeakers and 9 audio oscillators in an enclosed space. The idea comes from hearing such things as Leslie speakers. So as you can see in this photo, especially maybe the one that can be perceived better, I hope you can see it. And he's just moving around, yes, the speakers. So imagine, it's a completely different perception from what we usually expect. So start thinking about Stockhausen, Pierre Schaeffer and Henry, Edgar Varese, now Gordon Monahan, what Chowning was doing. So there are a lot of different systems. As a result of our deepest human desires throughout media history, there is a persistent research to create a feeling of being present somewhere else. This was written by Eleonora Stacchiotti in Digicult. From the oldest panoramas and 3D to the most recent augmented and virtual reality, all media technologies committed themselves to the task of producing the sensation of being on the very spot, of being immersed somewhere different from reality. Immersion is a metaphorical term coming from the physical experience of being submerged in water. We seek the same feeling from a psychologically immersive experience that we do from a plunge in the ocean or swimming pool. The sensation of being surrounded by a completely other reality, as different as water is from air, that takes over all of our attention, our whole perceptual apparatus. That was written by Janet Pulwright in his seminal book, Hamlet in the Holodeck from '97. Again, Eleonora Stacchiotti in Digicult wrote Murray about Janet Murray. Murray employed the adjective immersive in a metaphor to argue that those engaging in such experiences are not only sinking in another state, but are also affected in their consciousness. This metaphorical shift in meaning is not the only example of the growing correspondence of immersion, with several other concepts such as engagement, presence, flow, involvement, incorporation, absorption, or aesthetic illusion. And then we have, once again, different sets. Some of them are typical, like this one, or this could be something more or less expected. Like many people are understanding, I mean, that the space is becoming like the next challenge, and we are going through that kind of challenges now. But there is still a lot to achieve, to accomplish in that sense. And if we see, you know this because you are in that place, well, this is one of the sets that is emulating the dome that we have in the Mezzanine, because this is the one in the Mezzanine. And it is very interesting the way it is done, because at that concert where I was showing the previous photo, and that concert is simply the emulation of what we were testing before in the dome, in the Mezzanine. We transported this for a specific concert down in the hall. So we have this where we can start working with the different channels. We have these different angles, etc., etc. Here we have Simon Pierre teaching to my students from Concordia. I think Casey, I can see Casey that is there too. So, I mean, and different places with different arrays, different arrangements of speakers, and we understand how to use space in very, very different ways. coming back to Durand Bego, in this book, he talks about the 3D sounds and how distance and reverberation are key issues. So you can see distant cues, intensity and loudness cues, spectral and binaural cues to distance, etc., etc. But also, key elements are reverberation, like physical aspects, perceptual aspects, specific effects related to early reflection. And why he's talking about this? Because he's talking about replication, creation, transmutation, and representation. Of what? Replication of an existing spatial auditory condition. I'm not going into detail here. That will be for a next talk. But I mean, how we can use those conditions I was just mentioning a moment ago to replicate an existing spatial auditory condition, or to create a completely unknown spatial auditory experience, something completely unexpected, or transmute something. So you can create a transmutation between one spatial experience and another one, or to represent a virtual auditory world. So these are like 4 different categories, or 4 different approaches where we can see how to use space. There are so many possibilities, and like we can find here like different examples about what this means in each case. You have, in this case, for example, in this example, I mean, spaces with physical arrangement of speakers, of loudspeakers, with 100 and something speakers all around the audience. But of course, how we can control all this, how we can find interesting ways of manipulate sound in these spaces. Sometimes we have the contrary situation. Some years ago, I was doing a piece. This was with a group of colleagues coming from dance and from sound, and I was in charge of the composition in Flash Wave. We needed to find a way of, the audience was around, and the dancers, in this case, were in the middle, and they were creating the sounds. But we wanted to have a 3D, real 3D, but I mean, in all sense, like not only 360, but 3D world of sounds. It was really complex because there were only a few speakers. So how to create this feeling of 3D space? Well, we were testing many different systems where, with the limited resources we had, was really not working that well at the beginning, until finally we find a way of creating, like in the space, we create a special interface with 2 students from Concordia that were helping to create a system. I mean, we were developing a system where in the middle, I mean, as you can see, the seats were in a circle, the dancers were in the middle. So there was a quadraphonic space plus 1 speaker above. And usually this is too limited, only 4 speakers plus 2 subwoofers, but mainly 4 speakers around the audience plus the speaker just on the top. This is not enough to create a 3D sound. But if you explore enough and you test enough, what kind of frequencies are you going to spread in the different speakers, you can create that feeling of being surrounded in a 3D world. And of course, it's also key how the height of the speakers, I mean, the position of the speaker related to the audience. I mean, if it's 1 meter from the floor, or is it 1.5 meters, or where are you going to put exactly the speaker in the center? I mean, and then you clearly need to go back to this interface, and this interface was allowing to control this in real time. So we have one of the students were controlling the sound processing coming from the dancers to distribute like the timbral qualities, the time qualities, etc. But one other student where he was only working with manipulating the sound in space. And with this specific interface, he was able to manipulate the sound going up and down and through the 4 speakers around. And the result was finally really, really good. And because I'm moving now a little bit to the visual side, I would like to show first, as an introduction to let you know who this person is, Raúl Pavón. He was developing one prototype of an early voltage control synthesizer in Mexico in the 60s, early 60s, before Moog and Buchla. So he was creating this prototype of the Omniphone. But this engineer in Mexico, he was also creating the icophone that basically were Lissajous figures that were projected sometimes with colors. So there was a close relation between these images and the sounds. So let me go one step further and tell you a little bit more about what I'm talking here. Because I said visual music and immersivity is the title of the presentation. So visual music is a loose term that describes a wide array of creative approaches to working with sound and image. And there are many different ways of relate visuals and images and sounds. But I'm not going to stop here to explain all of these categories and the possibilities. So just think about the possibilities of linking sound and music. This is me, yes, many years ago, when I was doing the first piece in Argentina that was created in real time using digital means, both for music and sounds. And let me show you just a little bit, if I can. 46, let me see, 446. Just let me play just a little bit. So when we talk about visual music, we talk usually about abstract images, and is closely related to also experimental or electroacoustic music. And what you are seeing there is the first performance in Argentina. Is the only document that remained. So, but if you see, this was in different monitors. So this was in different monitors around the audience, and the sounds were also distributed in different ways around the audience. So we are starting to mix sounds and images now. Or some of you maybe have seen this piece because we're played by the GRMS events before at the Mezzanine and in concerts at the Cartesians. So this piece is linking again abstract images, and from the abstract images generated by different mathematical algorithms, from there I was extracting, analyzing, and extracting the final sounds. So it's a complete piece in the sense of I created the images with an algorithm, and from those same algorithms, we analyze the sounds, the images, and from the images, where the sounds coming from. And there were several versions for different number of speakers. And one of the presentations with 32 channels was done there at the Mezzanine, the concerts based on the Mezzanine. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit more about this. Extended reality is an umbrella term encapsulating augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, and everything in between. All immersive technologies extend the reality we experience by either blending the virtual and real worlds or by creating a fully immersive experience. This is one piece I was showing. It's a piece created with Luisa Guimaraes, Joao. We were presenting this piece. It's an immersive piece presented in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, like 2-3 years ago. And in this piece, you have like 8 channels with sounds. The speakers, loudspeakers are different positions inside that room, but also inside the room that you are already immersed, you have some people using a virtual reality system. So you have the sounds coming from the virtual reality system with images and sounds coming from there, but also external sounds surrounding the whole group inside this space, as you can see, maybe, I hope, in this photo. And these kind of surroundings, like these ones, I mean, this is like what we can see, for example, in the Spectro Computacionais, also done is a version of the piece we were seeing before, but in a panorama. The panorama working in a 360 environment. And from this 360 environment, you can see that we can talk that there are many different ways of finding like different formats. So there are many different formats about the images. So now we are in a different world, the world of images, and we see that same as in the sound world, where we can have like many speakers surrounding the audience, we can have also like many different configurations for the possible images being projected in the dome, in a visual dome in this case. And another version of the spectros computacionales also done with the same team, with Randolfo Juliao, Luisa Guimaraes, and myself, in this case, for full dome, for a planetarium. So this is a simulation of the piece being projected in a planetarium. So you can see some of the images, and we don't have the opportunity to listen to the piece now. Because the use of full domes in terms of visuals, you have like the International Planetary Society have like a group working in the specific functions related to the sound, of how to use sound in a dome. There are not that many standards, and we can talk more about this in another presentation, because this is a whole world of things. But at some point now, I would like to start melding all these things, just to use my last 5-6 minutes to show you. In this case, for example, I was presenting some of my research at the SEIS Planetarium, one of the oldest planetarium continuously functioning in the world. This is in Jena in Germany. And in this planetarium, you have a system, an audio system. The visuals are amazing, but this audio system is unbelievable too. They have 36 speakers on the horizontal level and 23 speakers on different height levels, one speaker in the zenith and 4 subwoofers. So, and then you have all this system with 32 audio channels, but 64 speakers. And these were some images I was taking in the Jena when we were projecting different pieces. I mean, during the festival, this was during the Full Dome Festival. And now you can see the immersion, but from another perspective, the immersion from the visual perspective. And let me start going also into the abstract world more and more. And I was founding like a symposium called Understanding Visual Music many years ago, and it was done in Canada, in Argentina, and Brazil. And we work with different formats, some traditional format, but also in some full dome formats, like in the planetariums in many countries around the world. And even like, for example, this one was a concert in Argentina in 2013, where amazing amount of people arriving. And the kind of things that we were presenting, I will show you some of the pictures. For example, we were doing some months ago. These are some flyers showing some of the concerts that were done, for example, the past year. And these are some of the photos of the immersion, the immersivity from the visual point of view. And let me tell you to read this. The word immersion is used to refer to the act of completely immersing oneself in another artificial world. This concept is in contrast to the metaphor of a window where one observes what is happening from the outside. In the context of virtual reality, immersion is the condition in which the user loses awareness of the fact that they are actually in an artificial world. This is a key element. Immersion, the act of immersing oneself in other worlds, provides the user with an extraordinary experience filled with emotional intensity. And just in my last few minutes, let me show you a few more images. These were taken in the Planetarium of Buenos Aires when we were doing some of the projects there. This is also in the amazing planetarium in Buenos Aires with an 8K of resolution. And close to the end, let me say, understanding immersivity as the possibility of experience produced by delineated spaces, real or imagined, forces us to confront the diverse mechanisms which produce these spaces and therefore to ground our analysis in empirical structural analysis. By shifting our focus from experiences to the productive forces that enable experiences, either aesthetics and otherwise, we're able to study concrete, delineated spaces which aim at inducing an immersed state in the participant or recipient. This is from the book Immersivity, an Interdisciplinary Approach to Spaces of Immersion. A few more images taken live. I was just on a side in the planetarium, and I was taking without any professional camera, just with my phone, amazing images. And let me just close with a very, very short example with visual by Jean-Sébastien Bailard and Patrick Trudeau, and music, the music by Alain Thibault, that you all know. So let me show you just a little bit of one of his works, so to understand how these things could cross both worlds. Of course, try to imagine that you are seeing this seated on a planetarium, yes, surrounded by a lot of speakers and surrounded completely immersed by these images. So let me show you a little bit more. We don't have time for more, so thank you so much to everyone, and I'm very happy that I was able to present this for all of you. I'm sure that these images were not seen very well, probably because of the Zoom flickering, but I think that you can still have an idea of what was going on. Thank you so much.